All right, let's unpack this then. I'm joined by the Department of Justice spokesperson, Crispin Phiri, to talk to me a bit further. So, Chris, good evening. Thank you for coming through. At this stage, how much are you able to tell us? What do we know about the status of the Guptas?
So, indeed, we can confirm, as we have done through our statement, that through the law enforcement agencies of the Emirati government, we've been informed that they have been captured and they're in custody. And so from here, what then follows is more cooperation, and then we would now start to begin the extradition process.
Yeah.
As you would know, an Interpol notice that generally is put out widely to sort of find where fugitives of justice are. And it seems that that process has now reached its end. Therein afterwards then kicks in the extradition process, which would require us to then file an extradition with the Emirati government, and they would be ordinarily brought before a court of law where that extradition process then begins.
Would you say this has been a process that has been in the making since the red notice was issued, I think around March this year?
Generally, when law authorities put out a red notice, they would put out a red notice because they believe that there are fugitives of justice somewhere out of the country. And so indeed it would be a process that has been in the making. These would be individuals that are competently charged before a court of law and have not availed themselves to answer any charges before a court of law, and thus this is then the process that ensues.
Speak a bit more on that, without seeking to put you in the position of the NPA and their spokespeople. From your understanding, because you are an interested party in that part of the process is at a political level between the various governments, at a diplomatic level as well, but also within the international relations structures, including Interpol. Without then seeking to delve deeper into charges and what proof the state has, etc., what makes them fit the category of international fugitives from justice?
Individuals who are charged before a court of law and are believed not to be in the country to answer for their case. So that's what would qualify one to be a fugitive. And as you correctly say, the Department of Justice, and as well as the Minister, is what we would call a central authority. He is essentially, by analogy, a post box of information that is gathered by law enforcement agencies in the country, and they would then say, we require certain information, for instance, or we would require these particular fugitives from a particular country. And then relations at a political level would then at least allow the central authority to engage that particular jurisdiction to say, these are individuals that are wanted. Can you please assist us with your law enforcement agencies to solve this legal problem or this quagmire that we have in our country? And then that's how the Ministry of Justice enters. So as a central authority, we would be the post box through which critical information is conveyed to another country and received, vice versa. I
like that analogy of a post box. Does this mean that, accepting that this is going to be a long and protracted process of extradition, the processes on their side in the UAE, does your status as almost like a post box mean that your interest will end when the NPA picks up in the matter of, I don't know, State versus Atul Gupta and others?
So precisely that actually is that as a post box, the process is entirely in the hands of the law enforcement agencies. They would put up all the documents that are required and then transmit them through us. And so we just essentially a vehicle to transmit very critical information to another law enforcement agency in another country or another central authority who in turn would then also pass it on to the law enforcement agencies. Yeah. So that is the process that would apply. And I don't think we are at a stage yet of S versus. I'm not sure if that would be the correct characterization. But at this stage, there's a case that the NPA believe they have against certain individuals, and those individuals are required to come and answer for that case in South Africa. The best way to bring them to answer this case is through an extradition process.
Crispin, locate this for us within the context of an extradition treaty between South Africa and the United Arab Emirates finally being finalized. My reading up on it reveals that it was a long and drawn-out process, and I think it predates you and the minister's presence at that department, but certainly going as far back as 2010, but it seemed to gather momentum in the last 3 years or so.
That could be correct. We initiated the extradition agreement with the Emirati government sometime in 2010, I believe, or even a bit forward than that. It was only ratified by the Emirati government as recently as 2020, I believe in July. And that was the mechanism through which we at least could rely on at a bilateral level. But there also are what we call multilateral institutions, like the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, which the United Arab Emirates are a party to, and so is South Africa and a number of countries in the world that are parties to. And that too is a mechanism that we could always rely on, and in fact in some instances is the starting point that we should be able to rely on when we would want to extradite individuals from other jurisdictions on acts of corruption in particular.
Let me throw you a curveball, Crispin, and I know I can throw it at you because you're an astute spokesperson and you'll take it in any direction you want. I'm pretty sure by now you will have heard the cynical reading that says the timing is fortuitous, in that the arrest of the Guptas come at a time when President Cyril Ramaphosa is in a spot of bother. You don't speak for the presidency, I accept that, but you are the first representative of the administration I'm engaging since this news broke. What would you say to that?
We're not in the business of diversions or creating alternative stories. We communicate facts as we receive them, and this is too much of an important matter to try and obfuscate anything that is happening in the country. We are presenting to the nation facts as they present themselves, and we are being transparent in that regard.
Yeah. And then just tell me about the role that you'll be playing now in the United Arab Emirates. My understanding is that when you sought the red notice alert, the Guptas had briefed lawyers to oppose that. I imagine that that opposition is likely to continue, possibly even get stiffer now that we are about to hit the point of trying to get them extradited to South Africa. Do you remain interested parties, at least on that leg of proceedings, the proceedings that are about how do you lawfully transfer them from the UAE to South Africa?
We would be represented by the authorities of the UAE, and they would brief us on any litigation challenges that they do incur, and we in turn would provide them with information so that they can continue to execute our request as is required in terms of the bilateral agreement and also multilateral instruments. So people would imagine that we would probably be sending over a set of lawyers to go and extradite on our behalf. No, that's not how it works. We are in cooperation with the UAE, with the government of that side, and they would be managing the request on our behalf, and that's ordinarily how it's done. So you would see in the South African courts, when we also execute an extradition request on behalf of other states, the NPA plays a very integral process in representing the interests of that other state and presenting information to the court which they've received from their counterparts.
Is it proper to sound a word of caution to South Africans to say this is going to be a long marathon of a process? It's unlikely to conclude within a few weeks, a few months. We're possibly looking at a year or possibly years.
Indeed, extradition is not a process of tapping someone on the shoulder and say, come, let's go.
Yeah.
It is often a drawn-out process that happens in the courts, and it's most likely that this extradition process would not be any different from other extraditions. Even in our own country, we've seen some extraditions take a couple of years to really conclude. So,
and we have experience in all of this, Crispin, don't we? Because just tapping into the lawyer in you as well, we've had cases like the Shrin Douani case, which in which we sought the extradition of someone and we successfully managed to get that done. And I imagine there are one or two other cases that demonstrate that we have the experience of crossing our T's and dotting our I's and basically just walking the long road until a person stands in the dock in a high court in South Africa.
I'm glad you've actually mentioned that. I think you would have seen the United Kingdom is actually one of the countries that we also have another extradition matter that is ongoing with currently. So we do have great experience in extraditing nationals back to South Africa. Granted, it doesn't take place in a very quick time. The turnaround time is not as quick as one would expect as a layman, but indeed we have been successful with extradition requests before, and there's no reason to believe that we will not be successful in this instance either.
Right. All right, Crispin Piri, I've got to thank you for your time. I think you've answered most of the questions that I had, and I'm happy to let you go at this point. That is Crispin Piri, who speaks on behalf of the Department of Justice and Correctional Services, talking to me about the breaking news about the arrest of the Guptas. That is Atul and Rajesh Gupta, who've been arrested in the United Arab Emirates.